vzácného hosta, pana profesora José Casanovu.
Děkuji.
Nejdřív několik slov k tomu kontextu tohohle celého projektu a pak bych stručně představil pana profesora a pak by se ujal slova. Tohle je druhé setkání v rámci mezinárodního projektu Víra přesvědčení nevěřících, který je 3letý, je podporovaný Templetonovou nadací a nositelé jsou Česká křesťanská akademie a Centrum pro politickou filozofii, etiku a náboženství při Filozofické fakultě Univerzity Karlovy. A struktura tohoto 3letého kurzu je taková, že se setkáváme 2krát ročně na 3 dny a vždycky ten první den večer je tato přednáška pro veřejnost, kde zveme skutečně hvězdy první velikosti, významné odborníky z zahraničí. Pak ten druhý den je uzavřené pracovní setkání toho mezinárodního týmu a třetí den se setkávají specialisté, sociologové, teologové, představitelé církví v České republice a snažíme se aplikovat ty poznatky na naší situaci. Domníváme se, že jsme vlastně zvolili dobré místo pro tohleto téma. O České republice se říká, že je nejateističtější země Evropy, ne světa a ukazuje se, že to je velmi hrubý odhad, protože ti lidé, kteří se prohlašují za nevěřící, představují vlastně velice širokou škálu lidí, širokou škálu postojů, podobně jako samozřejmě i ta skupina nebo ten segment věřících je velmi strukturovaná a mnohobarevná. Takže mezi těmi, kteří se považují za nevěřící, jsou často lidé, jsou daleka nejenom ateisté, jsou tam lidé duchovně hledající, jsou tam lidé, kteří se považují za spirituální, ale ne náboženské, jsou tam lidé, kteří jsou ateisté, to znamená, vlastně jsou jim tahleta témata lhostejná a jsou tam také ateisté, ovšem různého typu. Takže tohleto je vlastně to generální téma celého projektu. Pan profesor José Casanova je původem Španěl, který studoval v Rakousku, v Innsbrucku, potom ve Spojených státech, působil na významných amerických akademických centrech a v posledních letech je profesorem teologie a náboženských studií na Georgetown University ve Washingtonu DC a působí také v Centru pro náboženství, pro otázky náboženství ve veřejném životě. To je vlastně jeho hlavní téma. On je dnes skutečně považován za jednoho z nejvýznamnějších, ne nejvýznamnějšího žijícího sociologa náboženství. Tuhletu pozici si vydobil především svým dílem Religion in Public Life, kterou publikoval v roce 1993 a kterou vlastně změnil takové paradigma sociologie náboženství. Sociologie náboženství od té doby, kdy vznikla jako akademická disciplína na prahu 20. století, sdílela vlastně až do druhé poloviny 20. století takové paradigma sekularizace. S modernizací nastupuje sekularizace. Sekularizace znamená ústup významu náboženství. Náboženství bude mizet, možná zmizí docela. A pak se objevují revizionisté této teorie, kteří ukazují, a je to složitější. Jeden z nich byl Thomas Luckmann, který řekl, náboženství nemizí, ale stěhuje se do privátní sféry, privatizuje se. Pan profesor Casanova přišel v těch 90. letech s tezí, že vlastně je konec té privatizace náboženství a náboženství se deprivatizuje, vrací se do veřejného prostoru. A vrací se výrazně také do politického prostoru a poté, co uveřejní tuhletu svoji knihu, která patří k těm klasickým dílům moderní sociologie náboženství a vedle třeba Charlesa Taylora Secular Age, je to taková kniha, kterou prostě nemůže pominout někdo, kdo se touhletou problematikou zabývá, tak od té doby také vlastně ještě upřesnil a revidoval tu svoji tezi, protože se zaměřil nejenom na tu perspektivu atlantickou, evropskou a americkou, ale začal studovat náboženství v globálním měřítku a v kontextu globalizace, procesu globalizace. Ukazuje, že tak jako Peter L. Berger přišel s tou tezí tím hlavním procesem není sekularizace, nýbrž pluralizace náboženství, tak profesor Casanova ještě dále rozpracovává tuhletu tezi, ten efekt globalizace a ten globální pohled na proměny náboženství v naší době. Ale to myslím, že by na počátku stačilo. Vidíte, že pan profesor kývá, protože nám trošičku rozumí, protože protože kromě mnoha jiných jazyků mluví plně ukrajinsky a jeho manželka je Ukrajinka a právě se vrátil vlastně z Kyjeva, takže skrz tu Ukrajinu také do jisté míry rozumí naší řeči. Nicméně přednáška, která následuje, bude anglicky. Takže ještě jednou vítám pana profesora a prosím o slovo.
Děkuji, Father Thomas Halleck. Thank you, everybody. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to have been invited to deliver this lecture in this beautiful city, in this beautiful room. Thank you, Dominican Fathers, for hosting us. As Father Halleck has said, my perspective in the last year has become ever more global. I hope it's not too global, too general, too abstract, and that it still makes sense. The title is Conditions of Belief and Unbelief in Our Global Secular Age. And I will begin with a few statements about process of globalization. The formation of a global world system of religions in the plural is as intrinsic to process of globalization as the formation of a single world capitalist system and the formation of a global world system of nation states. But these three dynamics of globalization, the economic, the political, and the cultural religious, are distinctly different. The world capitalist system is a single global economy with its own internal division of labor between capital and labor, between center and periphery, firms, markets, etc. It is a single, internally constituted and differentiated system. There is only one global capitalist system. The world system of nation states, by contrast, is a system of plural, yet isomorphic units. It is constituted by the formation of a plurality of nation states, all assuming a similar form. The system became globalized through the expansion of the European Westphalian system of territorial nation states to the entire globe, through Western colonialism, and later through anti-Western, anti-colonial independence movements. By contrast, the global world system of religions is not only plural, but pluralist. Each religion is and claims to be unique and different, yet equal to the others. It is therefore a system based on the principle of equal pluralist diversity. The global system of world religions has been formed through a dual process of differentiation. First, through the modern differentiation of religion from non-religion, that is, from the secular, and second, through the differentiation of each and all religions from each other. Thus, when analyzing global religious dynamics, one needs to pay attention to both interrelated differentiations, namely, to the relation between the religious and the secular throughout the world, that is how the boundaries between the religious and the secular are constituted in different places, and to the relations of all religions with one another through the process of mutual recognition between religions. But let's look first at what I call the internal road of European confessionalization and deconfessionalization, which leads in Europe to secularization without religious pluralism. The secularization of Western European societies, understood here simply as the drastic and progressive decline in religious beliefs and practices among the European populations, is a social fact that is not in question. What is questionable is the theoretical explanation of European secularization as the necessary result of processes of modernization. Namely, European societies are secular because they are modern. This is not convincing. In fact, in the last decades, it has become increasingly evident that modernization in many parts of the world has not been accompanied by noticeable religious decline, but rather by different kinds of religious revitalization, and most significantly, by the proliferation of religious pluralism. Therefore, one needs to put into question the assumption that modernization per se necessarily leads to secularization. Thus, we need to examine two different questions. Firstly, if modernization per se cannot serve as a blanket explanation for the unquestionable secularization of European societies, what could serve as a more parsimonious and concrete explanation of European secularization from a global, comparative, historical perspective? Relatedly, and this will be the second question, given that modernization and secularization in Europe was not accompanied by dynamics of religious pluralization, how can one account for the fact that modernization in much of the rest of the world is accompanied by religious pluralization with limited secularization? To answer both questions, I'm going to build upon Peter Berger's, the famous Austro-American sociologist of religion, his last formulation of his revisionist theory of secular modernity. In his book, the last just written a few years before his death, he died 2 years ago, Berger, in his book, The Many Altars of Modernity, he proposed to change the focus of analysis from secularization to pluralism. He argued that modernity, changing his own thesis, does not produce necessarily secularization. What it does produce inevitably is pluralism, specifically two diverse kinds of pluralism, namely religious pluralism, or pluralism of many religions, and secular religious pluralism. My own succinct response to Berger is that European modernity produced secularization without religious pluralization, while modernity in much of the rest of the world produced religious pluralization without much secularization. In Berger's own words, quote, "The new paradigm should be able to deal with two pluralisms, the coexistence of different religions and the coexistence of religious and secular discourses. We need to account, first of all, for religious pluralism, that is, for the emergence of a global system of religions, which I call global denominationalism. But we also need to account, additionally, for secular religious pluralism, that is, for the emergence of differentiated but coexisting religious and secular spheres, both in social space and in the minds of individuals." Berger's new paradigm, however, is still embedded within a theory of Western modernization that views modernity itself as the carrier or catalyst of both types of pluralism, multi-religious pluralism and secular religious pluralism. Countering Berger, I would argue that European modernity is certainly the carrier or catalyst of the second type of modern pluralism, the secular religious one, but not of the first one, multiple religious pluralism. As the exceptional process of European secularization amply demonstrates, European modernity per se does not contribute to religious pluralism. There has been practically no process of religious pluralization in European societies since the 16th century, when basically the boundaries between Protestant and Catholic and Orthodox Christianity were shaped. People leave their confessional churches but never join new religions. We need an additional factor or an analytical framework to understand the emergence of a global system of religious pluralism, and this, in my view, has to be a theory of globalization, a globalization that both precedes Western secular modernity in the 16th, 17th centuries and continues in an accelerated and transformed manner after Western secular modernity in our global age. Global religious pluralism emerged before Western secular modernity in the early modern era of global interreligious encounters that accompanied the early modern European colonial expansion before global Western hegemony. Subsequently, religious pluralization has become accelerated in our contemporary global age to such an extent that through immigration is beginning to transform the process also, is beginning to transform in the process also the heartlands of European secularization. Again, European modernity leads to secularization, but not necessarily to religious pluralization, at least not within each European nation state. Globalization leads to religious pluralization, but not necessarily to secularization. The intertwinement of both processes is what produces the combination of the two types of pluralism and the simultaneity of global religious and secular dynamics. In the first part of my lecture, I want to examine the ways in which secular and religious dynamics are becoming intertwined everywhere through the globalization of the secular immanent frame. I will explain in a moment what we mean by the secular immanent frame, and through ongoing process of interreligious mutual recognition, which I call global denominationalism. The immanent frame, a concept developed by the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor, refers to the emergence of the modern institutional structures of democratic states, economic markets, scientific institutions, and mass media, all of which are secular and immanent, that is, without any vertical transcendent referent, and thus function, all of them, etsi Deus non daretur, as if God would not exist. The expression etsi Deus non daretur goes back to Hugo Grotius, the Dutch jurist, in his attempt to ground a system of international law without any divine or transcendent reference. In this respect, the early modern Westphalian system of states was a secular one. Each of the states assumed absolute sovereignty vis-à-vis the other, even if each of them was also simultaneously a confessional state, a Calvinist state, a Lutheran state, an Anglican state, a Catholic state. But the system itself was secular, in the sense that they enforced the religious confessionalization of their subjects. Cuius regio, eius religio was the principle of the Westphalian peace, the Peace of Westphalia. The first truly modern secular state, however, the United States of America, was born as a secular state without any previous process of confessionalization. There was never a national church in the United States. It was based from its inception on a wall of separation between church and state, instituted by the dual clause of the First Amendment, which prohibited any religious establishment at the state level, while protecting the free exercise of each and all religions, the many Protestant denominations in civil society. As the history of the United States shows, however, separation of church and state does not mean the separation of religion and politics, and the secularization of the state can go hand in hand with periodical religious revivals of all kinds within society. It is obvious that capitalist markets also function as if God would not exist, even though some of the global capitalist tycoons in the United States or in many Muslim countries may be religious believers. Similarly, American scientific institutions, which as we know have produced a majority of Nobel Prizes in the sciences in World War II, also function as Deus non daretur, yet some of the scientists may possibly be believers, and certainly large sectors of the American population may believe in creationism in the same sense as other sectors of the same population may believe in Darwinian evolutionism. In other words, the global secular immanent frame is compatible with all kinds of religious dynamics at the individual as well as at the institutional level. Similarly, in the rest of the world, the globalization of the immanent frame, namely the globalization of the secular state, of market capitalism, of scientific institutions, is not necessarily accompanied, as in Europe, by the exit from religion, people leaving religion. That is, by the privatization and decline of religion. It may be accompanied, rather, by all types of religious transformations in different directions, as the religious secular binary system of classification that emerged originally within Western Christianity enters in dynamic, transformative interaction with all non-Western systems of classification. All the religious cultural systems, Christian and non-Christian, Western and non-Western, have been and continue being transformed through these global interactive dynamics. Everywhere, the global expansion of the immanent frame of the secular age leads to the institutionalization of different kinds of secular regimes, which become interconnected with different religious dynamics. It's to be obvious, however, that when people around the world use today the same category of religion, and the category of religion has become globalized, they actually mean very different things. The actual concrete meaning of whatever people denominate as religion can only be elucidated in the context of their particular discursive practices. By the very fact that the same category of religion is being used globally across cultures and civilizations testifies to the global expansion of the modern secular religious system of classification of reality which first emerged in the modern Christian West. Paradoxically, the global institutionalization of the secular immanent frame becomes the very guarantor of the post-axial secular religious system, which guarantees the equal, non-hierarchic free exercise of religion to all forms of religion, pre-axial, axial, and post-axial. Indeed, what characterizes the contemporary global moment is the fact that all forms of human religion, past and present, from the most primitive to the most postmodern, are available for individual and collective appropriation. Equally relevant, moreover, is the fact that increasingly they must learn to coexist side by side in today's global cities. This contemporary social fact tends to put into question all teleological schemes of religious rationalization and development which tended to place primitive and traditional forms of religion as older human cultural forms to be superseded by more modern, secular, and rational ones. While nationally, religious dynamics are mainly conditioned by particular forms of secular regimes, by states, and by different patterns of state management of religious freedom and religious pluralism, at the global level, we are clearly witnessing the emergence of what I call global denominationalism. Denominations is the name of religious communities in the United States. It's a word that cannot be translated to any European language. When we translate denomination, it's translated as church, as confession, as sects, and denomination is none of the three. In a moment. It is the proliferation of deterritorialized, transnational, global imagined communities, or also could be called global ummas, that I call the emergent global denominationalism. This global denominationalism today encompasses the so-called old world religions, all the isms, Catholicism, Protestantism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Confucianism, Taoism. All these isms were all invented in the 19th century. The names Catholicism and Protestantism did not exist in the 18th century. They are all products of the 19th century, the same with all these Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. are products of the 19th century. In the 19th century, Islam was called Mohammedism. Only now we call it Islam. So it was isms, was all inventions of the 19th century. So we have all these old religions, which became isms, as well as many new forms of hybrid globalized religions, such as the Baha'is, the Munis, the Hare Krishnas, the Afro-American religions, Falun Gong, etc. These global religious denominations today compete with many other forms of secular imagined communities, as well as with modern nationalism. The emerging global denominationalism in this respect includes religious as well as secular denominations. By denominationalism, I mean a system of mutual recognition of groups within society. It is the name which we give to ourselves and the name by which others recognize us. Who are you? I'm a Baptist, I'm a Methodist, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Jew. Indeed, distinctive of the American system of religious denominationalism is the fact that it is not state regulated. The state has no right to ask its citizens, which is your denomination. It does not appear in any official document, not in the census, not in the Immigration Naturalization Service. The state cannot ask its citizens, which religion do you have? And yet, in civil society, people constantly ask themselves, and they recognize each other by those names. So it is a system of mutual recognition of group identities which are formed precisely in this coming together. So the process of constitution of a global system of religions can best be understood as a process of global religious denominationalism at the level of global civil society, whereby all the so-called world religions are redefined and transformed in contraposition to the secular through interrelated reciprocal processes of particularist differentiation, universalistic claims, and mutual recognition. As Roland Robertson, again a sociologist of globalization, has emphasized, universal particularism and particular universalism are intrinsically interrelated and inherent in processes of globalization. Each world religion claims its universal right to be unique and different, thus its particularism, while at the same time presenting itself globally as a universal path for all of humanity. Like internal denominationalism in the United States, global denominationalism is emerging as a self-regulated system of religious pluralism and mutual recognition of religious groups in global civil society. Global denominationalism emerges through a process of mutual recognition of the particular and universal claims of each religion. Looking at interreligious and religious secular conflicts around the world, and we know there are a lot of them, there are a lot of interreligious conflicts and a lot of religious secular conflicts, it is evident that the ongoing process of mutual recognition of all religions and of mutual recognition of the religious and the secular is not smooth and may be accompanied by violent conflicts between religious groups as well as between religious and secular worldviews. It is all part of the global struggle for universal, particular, human, mutual recognition in the Hegelian sense of the term. It is an open empirical question, which should be the central focus of a global sociology of religion, how this ongoing global process of secularization, through the globalization of the secular immanent frame, of sacralization, the way in which one talks of sacred person, the sacred rights of the human person, sacred human rights, or sacred nation, sacred citizenship, and religious denominationalism are mutually interrelated in different civilizations, sometimes symbiotically, as in religious nationalist fusion, when religious and nation are fused, becoming sacred, or in the religious defense of human rights, when we talk of the sacredness of the human person, but often antagonistically, as in the violent conflicts between the sacred, secular, immanent norm of freedom of expression. So secularists say that the freedom of expression is our sacred norm, and we will defend it, against transcendent theistic norms, which believers want to protect from what they call blasphemy. Let me reiterate once again that the global humanity is becoming simultaneously more religious and more secular, but in significantly different ways. In different types of secular regimes, in different religious traditions, and in different civilizations. What characterizes our contemporary global secular age is the fact that, as pointed out by the German sociologist Hans Joas, who will be the next lecturer within this series, faith is an option. Faith and unbelief both are options that cannot be taken for granted. That means that both belief and unbelief become options for individuals as well as for communities. And now, in the second part of my lecture, let me enter into just a few comments about the faiths and beliefs of unbelievers. Now that we have examined the conditions of belief and unbelief in our global secular age, we can enter into an examination of the forms and types of modern unbelief. While the social sciences have been studying religion, religious phenomena, and religious beliefs and practices for over 200 years, the social science of religion, religious studies, research on the other of religion, and the secular is only in its beginning stage. Indeed, until very recently, the sociology of religion in the West, particularly in Europe, was single-handedly dedicated to the study of secularization, that is, to document the decline of religious beliefs and practices in modern secular societies. But practically no social scientists express any interest in studying the secular. What happens after religion? Apparently, social scientists had been working under the assumption of what Charles Taylor has called the subtraction theory of the secular. You subtract. Namely, the secular was understood to be the natural anthropological substratum that subsists once the superstructural and necessary addition of the supernatural is removed. The natural is the secular. Primitive societies added religion. Now we got rid of religion, and what remains is the natural anthropological. As anthropological natural, therefore, the secular can be taken for granted and does not need to be studied. It was only 20 years ago that the anthropologist Talal Assad expressed for the first time the need to develop an anthropology of the secular. Since then, calls for the development of a comparative sociology and phenomenology of the secular, and for the comparative research in multiple types of secularity and secularisms have proliferated. Above all, it was the dramatic growth of the nuns in the United States in the last decades, particularly among the younger generations, that has fostered the interest in examining the beliefs and worldviews of unbelievers. In this context, the Project Templeton and the faiths and beliefs of unbelievers, under which today's lecture is taking place, is of enormous relevance. Particularly significant is the attempt to develop comparative analysis of the nuns in Eastern post-Soviet societies and in Western European societies. The nuns, as a category, refers simply to those who, in sociological surveys in the United States, when asked for their religious affiliation, mark the category none, which appears at the bottom of a long list of religious denominations such as mainline Protestant, evangelical Christian, Catholic, Orthodox, Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, etc., and then none. So in this respect, it refers simply to those who claim no religious affiliation. The proportion of nuns in the United States in the last 2 decades has grown significantly, from circa 8% of the population in the year 2000, only 8%, to over 24% of the population today, so triple. Further inquiries, however, have shown that the nuns can be subdivided into 3 relatively equally different categories in terms of the proportion, 1/3 of each. First, unaffiliated religious, which in Europe we tend to call believing without belonging. Second, spiritual not religious, or individual spiritual seekers, which are not associated with any form of organized religion. And third, unbelievers proper, a group which includes reflexive agnostics, secular humanists, atheists, as well as simply unreflexive unbelievers. Following this classification, I'm going to briefly explore these 4 categories from a global comparative perspective. Believers without belonging. Secularization in Western Europe has taken primarily the form of unchurching and Kirchlichen, leaving the churches, which can best be understood as a form of liberation from the type of territorialized confessional religiosity, which was the legacy of the Westphalian system and its dynamics of a state-enforced confessionalization under the principle cuius regio eius religio, The Czech Republic, you see it everywhere. The Catholic reconfessionalization of the Czechs and of both Bohemian, Moravia, you see it. You feel this forced confessionalization, and you understand that people, when they are free, want to be out of this enforced confessionalization from above. European Christianity, for all kinds of reasons we cannot enter into today, never made the full historical transition from territorial national churches based on the territorial parishes or Pfarrgemeinde to competing religious denominations or communities in civil society based on voluntary religious associations, which following Tocqueville's analysis one can see as the paradigmatic form of modern religious community. I had the privilege of attending yesterday the Eucharist at Salvator Kirche, Salvator Church, and this is what a voluntary religious community looks like. It's a voluntary religious community which has been formed by people seeking something, not because they were forced to come to church every Sunday. In this respect, Europeans tend to break away from their national churches without ever looking for alternative religious communities. They simply become unaffiliated. Public opinion surveys make evident that while there has been a drastic decline in church affiliation and in church religious practices, a majority of the population in most European countries still maintain a general belief in God. But those surveys also make evident that the depth and extent of individual religiosity across Europe is rather low, insofar as those people who profess belief in a personal God, those who pray with some regularity, and those who claim to have had some personal religious experience are a small minority in most Western European countries and in many Eastern European countries as well. The situation in most post-Soviet Eastern European societies is a mixed one. East Germany and the Czech Republic show no evidence of any significant religious revival after the fall of communism and remain as secular as they were under communist regimes. Indeed, both are the two most secularized societies in all of Europe. Poland, despite some mild secularization, remains the most religious society in Europe, with very high levels of religious belief in God, over 90%, of Catholic affiliation, also around 90%, and although significantly diminished in comparison to the Solidarity period, still maintaining very high levels of religious practice between 40–50%. Russia, like most Eastern Orthodox societies, has experienced a significant religious revival after the fall of communism. Particularly, there has been an increasing self-identification of the majority of the Russian Slavic population as Orthodox, from 31% in 1991 to 69% in 2011, and probably today is already 75% of the population. Parallel to it, the proportion of the Russian Slavic population who self-identifies as non-religious has decreased at a similar rate from 61% then to 22% now. However, increasing affiliation with the Russian Orthodox Church does not denote the traditional meaning of allegiance to the true faith, orthodoxy, or the right doxa, but rather the modern confessional identity as members of the Russian Orthodox nation, as a typical form of belonging without believing, also present in most Nordic Lutheran countries, when most people belong to the national Lutheran churches, although they are unbelievers. In fact, regular religious practice in Russia remains very low, hovering around 4% of the population. And this has not changed. In the last 30 years, while religious affiliation has gone, religious practice has remained regularly. Around 4% of the population go regularly to church. Although it rises significantly on Easter and other major holidays, Still, half of the population in Russia, half of the population claims to never attend church. In terms of the entire population of the Russian Federation, the distribution of believers and unbelievers is the following: Orthodox 43%, other religions 15%, and of course includes Muslims, Buddhists, Jews, animists from Siberia, etc. Spiritual, not religious, 25% of the population in the Russian Federation claim to be spiritual, not religious. It's a huge number, unique in all of Europe. And atheist, non-religious, 13% of the population, has diminished significantly from levels of 40% to 13% now. Ukraine, a country which I know well, shows a deeper religious revival after communism, with a highly pluralist and fluid religious field, with various competing Orthodox denominations, and I call them denominations because that's what they are. They are different names they have, and people say, I belong to this, but they keep changing. A significant Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, significant Protestant, Jewish, and Muslim minorities. However, the Orthodox majority, which is an Orthodox country, which is around 75% of the population, this has not changed. In the last 40 years, around 75% of the population claims to be Orthodox, but they show very soft levels of confessionalization or of a strong denomination. According to the most recent survey from the Rasubkov Center, just this past January 2020, thus 1 year after the Tomos of Autocephaly, establishing the new Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the religious affiliation in Ukraine was the following: 34% of the population claimed to be members or affiliated with the new Orthodox Church of Ukraine. 14% remain members of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate. But a very significant number, 28%, claim to be simply Orthodox. They don't want to choose sides. They're simply Orthodox. The Greek Catholics remain 8-9%, has not changed. And then Protestants and Evangelicals, which are 1%, but probably are undercounted. I would say that if you will have not the small samples, but much larger, in some sections, 3 to 4% of the population will be Protestants and Evangelicals. Other religions, Jews, Muslims, 1%. Non-denominational Christians, simply Christians, don't want to call themselves other things, almost 9%. Non-believers, only 5.6%. Together, the simply Orthodox and the simply Christians, both forms of believing without denominational belonging, constitute over 36% of the Ukrainian population, larger than any denomination. The proportion of atheist non-believers has decreased significantly in the last decades, is less than 1% in the Western Oblast, so in Galicia, Transcarpathia, Riuni, Volyn, less than 1%, while it grows to 10% in the eastern and southern oblasts. Significantly, even in the most Russian parts, is much lower than the Russian. Regular church attendance, which is not common in Orthodox countries, reaches 21%, with significant difference within the Western Oblast, where it is 34%, and the Eastern and Southern Oblast, which is 13%. Among the church-affiliated, regular church attendance is higher. Circa 32% of the self-denominated Orthodox go regularly, once a week, to church. Did you go to church last week? This is the standard you use. Among Greek Catholics, it's 45% that regularly go to church, which is like the Polish model. Even among the unaffiliated, simply Orthodox and simply Christian, weekly church attendance nears 10%, a proportion which is much higher than in Russia. Those data are particularly significant because if one considers the fact that over 60% of the population of Ukraine indicate that they were not brought up religiously at home. So they had no religion under communism. In their families, they were no religion, and yet now it's one of the most religiously Orthodox countries in Europe. The condition of believing without belonging has been the traditional condition of religious life in most cultures of Asia for millennia. Most Asian religions, until very recently, had no tradition of religious affiliation or membership, and no normative tradition of regular weekly temple attendance. There was no holiday of rest in any of the Asian religions, unlike in the Abrahamic religions. So the notion of the Sabbath, there is a Sunday, there is a day of the week which is a holiday to go to church, does not exist in Asian religious traditions. And there is no membership. So the measurements we have, sociologists in the West, don't count in Asian societies. Thus, a majority of the population in China or Japan, when asked about their religious affiliation, may also indicate also none of the above, when in fact they may follow Confucian ethics, may visit indiscriminately diverse temples at different times, Buddhist, Taoist, Shinto, etc., and may offer regularly gifts and prayers to their ancestors in their home altars, before going to work and after coming back home. The second category is spiritual, not religious. This is a category which has attained increasing relevance in the modern secular age. It denotes particularly a negative attitude towards institutional organized religion, with a reluctance to identify oneself as an unbeliever, secular materialist. It signifies a relative openness towards some form of transcendence, which may have the most diverse expressions. From the seekers of individual paths of self-expression, such as the form described by Robert Bella as Sheilaism, a young woman called Sheila, and this is my religion. It's my own, and I call it Sheilaism. Or those forms that Thomas Luckmann called invisible religion, to those seekers who are attuned to various paths of Eastern mysticism, such as yoga or Buddhist meditation, to various forms of New Age spirituality, to diverse forms of spiritism and animism, we find expression in interest in the occult, paranormal phenomena, as well as in Gnostic forms of science fiction, Manichaean cosmic struggles, and extraterrestrial life. The category of spiritual, not religious, takes diverse forms throughout the globe. It is perhaps less relevant in highly secular, post-Christian Western Europe. Not very people in Western Europe call themselves spiritual, not religious. The category is not yet widespread, but some significant exceptions in Scandinavia and in the British Isles. As already indicated, it is widespread in post-Soviet Russia, 25%, 1/4 of the population, and it is significant throughout the Americas, from the United States to Brazil, the land where the most diverse forms of spiritism flourish. Animism and spiritism permeate all African cultures and most Asian cultures. Openness to spirituality also finds high intellectual expression in many of the manifestos of avant-garde modernist art, from abstract cubism to surrealism and futurism, in self-definitions of the spiritual East against the materialist West, and in all kinds of critique of materialist capitalism, most significantly the growing ecological consciousness that finds such diverse expressions as vegetarianism, green movements, reverence for living nature, Mother Earth, and the cosmos. Third category, reflexive rejectionists of theist transcendence, agnostics, secular humanists, and atheists. Modern reflexive atheism denies the existence of God for any of three related rationales. First, radical agnosticism, which for cognitive epistemological reasons denies the very possibility of postulating such a supra-empirical or supernatural reality, or of making meaningful assertions about such reality on linguistic analytical grounds. This is the kind of atheism of intellectuals. Self-sufficient secular humanism that rejects any transcendence beyond human flourishing as a form of theonomy, namely theonomic dependency that supposedly deprives humans of their autonomy, or as otherworldly projections that waste human energies in futile, otherworldly pursuits that should be redirected toward this worldly utilitarian pursuits. This is a very clear utilitarian moral position. And then the radical anti-theist that reject on moral grounds the existence of what they consider to be an unjust God responsible for an imperfect universe or for the suffering and injustice of humanity. These are the three typical forms. We know them since the 18th century. They are common forms. To all three rationales, one can respond with the famous anecdote of the person who in the times of the troubles in Northern Ireland, crossing a checkpoint from a Catholic to a Protestant neighborhood, was confronted with a militiaman, an armed militiaman, who cried, "Hands up, Catholic or Protestant?" No, he responded, "I'm an atheist." "Yes, but which one?" There is no such a thing as atheism in the abstract. In concrete terms, which is the God one denies? Which is the God one does not believe exists? It is a post-Protestant, a post-Catholic, post-Jewish, post-Muslim, post-Hindu, post-Buddhist, etc. In the same form, there is no secularity in the abstract. The multiple forms of secularity are so many transformations of religious experiences and worldviews. That is the reason why it is necessary to develop a comparative sociology, anthropology, and phenomenology of the multiple forms of secularity as forms of diverse post-religious experiences. Finally, unreflexive secularity being simply secular without religion, what we call the apathist. At least in Europe, this is probably the most widespread, almost taken for granted form of unbelief. Self-contained, self-sufficient secularity is tied to the phenomenological experience of living without religion as a normal, quasi-natural, taken for granted reality, all my neighbors. The naturalization of unbelief or irreligiosity as the normal modern human condition is a characterization that certainly applies to a majority of Western post-Christian societies. Self-sufficient secularity, that is the absence of religion, has a better chance of becoming the normal taken for granted position if it is experienced not simply as an unreflexive, naive condition, as just a fact, but actually it is perceived as the meaningful result of a quasi-natural process of development. As Taylor has pointed out, modern unbelief is not simply a condition or absence of belief, nor merely indifference. It is a historical condition that requires the perfect tense, a condition of having overcome the irrationality of belief. Intrinsic to this phenomenological experience is a modern stadial consciousness, a consciousness of having gone through stages of development, inherited from the Enlightenment, which understand this anthropocentric change in the condition of belief as a process of maturation and growth, as a coming of age, and as progressive emancipation. For Taylor, this stadial phenomenological experience serves to ground the experience of exclusive humanism as the positive, self-sufficient, and self-limiting affirmation of human flourishing, and as the critical rejection of transcendence as self-denial and self-defeating. This historical understanding of secularism has the function of confirming the superiority of our modern secular outlook over other supposedly earlier and therefore more primitive religious forms of understanding. To be secular means to be modern, and therefore by implication, to be religious means to be somehow not yet fully modern. This is the ratchet effect of a modern historical stadial consciousness, which turns the very idea of going back to a surpassed condition into an unthinkable intellectual regression. This secularist stadial consciousness is a crucial factor in the widespread secularization that has accompanied the modernization of Western European societies. Europeans tend to experience their own secularization, that is, the widespread decline of religious beliefs and practice in their midst, as a natural consequence of their becoming modern individuals. In this respect, the European theory of secularization, mediated through this historical stadial consciousness, tends to function as a self-fulfilling prophecy. In non-European societies, however, where processes of modernization are not associated phenomenologically with such a historical stadial consciousness, the experience of modernity may be associated not with secularity, but with different forms of religious revival and individual religious choice and affirmation. Going back to Europe, following Max Weber, one may postulate that the death of God in Europe, in Nietzschean terms, opens the way for new forms of modern polytheism in which individuals can freely choose the many gods they may prefer to worship: Eros or Venus, Athena, or the god of wisdom, Mars, the god of war, Mammon, the god of wealth. One is reminded of the classic film by Pasolini, the Italian filmmaker, Teorema, in which each member of the family seeks salvation through the most diverse paths and practices. Here is where the project and the faith and beliefs of unbelievers is extremely promising if it is able to illuminate the values which drive and inform the worldviews and practices of ordinary modern unbelievers in different national and societal contexts. Thank you very much.
Jose. Okay. Tak teďka já myslím, že uděláme jenom takovou tu mini pauzičku, neopouštíme ti, kdo musí odejít teďka bezprostředně, tak mají tu šanci. A pak bychom mohli bezprostředně pokračovat v otázkách a odpovědích. Já myslím, že nebudeme dělat nějakou zvláštní pauzu, vzhledem k tomu, že poměrně dost pozdě večer. Takže prosím, kdo by se jel první otázky, poznámky. Samozřejmě můžete česky a budete překládat.
Tady máme prvního dobrovolníka.
Thank you very much for the lecture. I would like, if there is some sort of explanation that you have for the lack of sort of revival or coming back to Christianity in the Central and Eastern Europe countries after the fall of communism, and how do you explain the very recent, let's say, re-Christianization in this sort of a little bit nationalistic, the belonging without the believing that we see today connected with, let's say, the discourse with the migration, if you have any thoughts. Thank you.
As I said before, if modernization does not explain the rates of secularization, because obviously East Germany is much more secular than West Germany, and nobody will claim that East Germany is more modern than West Germany. You could compare the Czech Republic and Poland, two Slavic post-Soviet societies, radically different. Italy and France, Italy much more religious, France much more so. It's very clear that although all of Europe is very secular, the rates, why some societies and others, I explain in terms of process of confessionalization and deconfessionalization. Namely, it is when people experience this confessionalization as enforced from above by state authorities, as happened in the Czech Republic with the Counter-Reformation. Then modernization leads to deconfessionalization. People want to be free from this enforced confessionalization. This has different type of dynamics. But East Germany, when I compare East Germany, Poland, Ukraine, and Russia, it became for me very clear that to understand those dynamics, one who understands these histories of confessionalization, deconfessionalization. Poland, we think it is always a Catholic society, but actually Poland was one of the most pluralistic religious society of Europe. In the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, when all other societies were enforcedly homogenized, confessionalized. In Poland, you had the Prussian Lutherans, the Catholic Szlachta, Polish and Lithuanian, the Orthodox Cossacks from Ukraine, and because you had the upper, you had three religions, then they would accept all the religious minorities from all of Europe that had to escape the process of enforced confessionalization, ended up in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Jews, all the Jews of Europe, ended up there. The Moravian Brethren, Hungarian Unitarians, the Tatars, Muslim Tatars, all of them were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. When Poland became independent after World War I, only 51% of the population were Catholics. You have very large minorities, around 12-13% Greek Catholics, mainly Ukrainians and Belarus, around 10% Orthodox, Belarus and Ukrainians, around 12-13% Jews, and about 10-12% Lutheran Protestants, Germans. So, however, after the Soviet occupation, after World War II, with the forced changing of borders, Poland became Catholic for the first time, unitary. And yet it was not enforced from above, because the state was an anti-Catholic state. Catholicism had as a form of resistance against the Nazis, against the Soviets. So Poles identify religion with liberty, with freedom, not with enforced identity. And so even today, when people are not happy with the Catholic Church, and there are a lot of problems with the Catholic Church in Poland and politics, and probably this may lead to secularization in the next generation, it's very probable, but not because Poles are becoming more modern, but because they're responding to precisely the politics of Catholicism. The same way the nuns today, in the United States, the younger generations, are abandoning religion, not because finally they are modern, but because they are responding on moral grounds against the churches that become involved in politics for causes that the young people consider immoral. For the churches, they defend the morality of the traditional family against the immorality of same-sex marriage and everything else. For the young generation, they are the moral, the churches are immoral. So it's on the grounds of the immorality of those churches defending these traditional norms that the young people abandon religion. When I say that in Russia, people join the identification with the Moscow Patriarchate, but in the same way that now the regime and the Moscow Patriarchate are fully embedded, not only nationally, but we know transnational, in the sense that the Moscow Patriarchate has become the soft power of Russian geopolitics, and the mobilization of Russia to organize right-wing populist movements against liberalism, against secularism, against the European Union is precisely part of these dynamics. But the paradox is that all those are transnational dynamics today. So the paradox is that you have so-called nationalist movements being actually organized by evangelical Catholics from the United States, from the Russian Orthodox Church. So this is part of a complex globalization. I would say that today the crucial issue is not anymore religion. Most people today accept religious pluralism. Religious pluralism is not an issue practically anywhere. It was not 50 years ago. 50 years ago, we still thought that there are true churches, true religions, and false religions. Today, religious pluralism in most Western societies is accepted. It is moral pluralism we don't accept. It is on what Durkheim would call moral grounds, which is, we know now that there was a time then societies thought, and everybody thought, Protestants and Catholics church people, politicians, that there could be not several religions in one country. So it was not that religion was intolerance and violent because of that you have the religious wars. We had religious wars in early modernity because nobody could even accept the possibility that several religions could live together in the same city. It's the impossibility of believing there could be two bishops in the same city, which still is what the Russian Orthodox Church claims, canonical territory. This is our canonical territory. There can only be one church in our territory. So today, we accept religious pluralism without any problem, but can we have multiple moralities? Durkheim thought this was not possible. So it's on the grounds of civil religion, not our conflicts today are not over religion or over civil religion. And this is what then the people who on the grounds of defending Christian Europe against Islam, those are usually not religious people. The religious Christians believers are not the anti-Muslims. It is post-Christian Europeans which are the anti-Muslims. And they defend an idea of Europe which has to do with the civil religion of Europe. They claim Europe is Christian, although they abandoned Christianity before. But now they have recovered Christianity against Islam. So those are complex dynamics that come together with globalization.
Náš čas hodně postoupil, tak je tu prostor pro poslední dotaz. Všichni se hlásí. Tak já vyberu dalšího dobrovolníka.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I have one question of curiosity. You described Ukraine in quite some detail, and it seems that it's in several respects unique, unlike its neighbors, unlike many of those trends you were talking about. What do you think is the reason? Why does Ukraine, besides your wife coming from Ukraine, of course?
Well, you know, Ukraine precisely had no confessional state, had no confessional church. The Oblast of Lviv, the Diocese of Lviv, was the stronghold of orthodoxy against the Uniate Church. When the Uniate Church was established in the Napoleonic Commonwealth, the great defender of orthodoxy was Lviv. Then Lviv, under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, became the stronghold of the Greek Catholic Church. Then came the Soviets and forced everybody to become members of the Moscow Patriarchate. Then came Glasnost, and 50% went back to the old Greek Catholic Church, but 30% remained Orthodox, but now in three different versions. Moscow Patriarchate, Kyiv Patriarchate, Autocephalous Orthodox Church. And Lviv has the largest proportion of Protestants in all of Ukraine, and last proportion now of Muslim Tatars, which are refugees and so on. So the most pluralist region of Ukraine is the one that was the stronghold of the Greek Catholic Church. And so it is the Western Oblasts, which are the most religious, tradition, but also the most pluralist. Look, no country in Europe could have the four highest offices of the land belonging to four different religions. Under Poroshenko, he was an Orthodox member of the Moscow Patriarchate. His prime minister was a Jew, Groisman. The head of parliament was a Greek Catholic. And the head of national security was a Baptist. The president of Ukraine today is a Jew. And nowhere was there any question of a Jew being president of Ukraine, which supposedly has been historically the most anti-Semitic country of Europe. And yet, never has been raised as an issue. Those are unique phenomena of Ukrainian pluralism. Maidan, you had all religions, all Protestants, all Orthodox, Greek Catholics, Roman Catholics, Jews, Muslims, all of them praying together, the imams, the rabbis, the priests, all of them basically celebrating the funerals of everybody else. Ukraine is the only country in Europe that has a council of religious communities, not organized by the state, but organized by all the religions to which belong all the Orthodox churches, the Greek Catholics, the Roman Catholics, all the Protestants, Baptists, Evangelicals, Lutherans, the Jews, the Muslims, and they change every 6 months who is the head of this community. So 6 months ago, the head was the rabbi of Ukraine, so he took to have the meeting in Israel. So you have all the religions of Ukraine went to Israel to have their meeting in Israel. This is a unique phenomenon has nothing to do with my wife. I'm sorry.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, José. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for attendance. And next time.
Děkujeme všem a pokud byste chtěli si prohlédnout toto video ještě jednou, tak bude na stránkách České křesťanské akademie, když dáte do vyhledávače projekt Templeton, plus tam budou další přednášky z minula i z budoucna. Děkujeme za účast i za pozornost.